Don't make this about you, Senator. It's Lorna's moment. That's what my mother whispered as I stood beside the cake I ordered, the flowers I arranged, the toast I was never asked to give. No thank you for the hours I stayed late to fix her deck. No recognition for the client I brought in last quarter. Just, it's Lorna's moment. But the truth is, it always was. Ever since we were kids. And me? I was the quiet support beam in a house that never remembered who held it up. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment 1. If not, hold tight to that visibility. Drop a 0. Because sometimes the loudest betrayal sounds like silence. I wasn't surprised my name was left off the credits. Just tired. It's a different kind of ache when silence becomes expected. The conference room was as cold as ever, air conditioning on full blast, despite the frost outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow on the table's chrome edges and the stack of paper cups next to the lukewarm coffee pot. My own coffee had gone cold an hour ago. It sat in front of me like a reminder. Even heat fades if left untouched. I sat with my back straight, fingers lightly clasped in front of me, while Lorna ran through the presentation. Or rather, the presentation I had built over the last 2 weeks. Concepts I had sketched on napkins, then sculpted late into the night. She clicked through each slide like she owned it. Every page bore the same footer. Prepared by L. Madsen. Neatly typed, efficient, thorough. Samantha nodded with mechanical enthusiasm. Brad laughed a little too hard at a data point I had added last minute. No one looked at me. Last week, I'd watched Lorna accidentally overwrite my original deck with a version that looked nearly identical, except for the initials. When I mentioned it in passing, she said, "Oh, I thought it was shared work." She always had a way of sounding sweet and firm at once, like someone offering you pie they'd baked from your own ingredients. This week, she hadn't bothered with the pretense. I clicked through the deck calmly, slide after slide, a hollow rhythm echoing somewhere in my chest. Maybe they saw it. Maybe they didn't. Either way, no one said a word. My hands stayed folded, but my shoulders tightened each time she hit a transition I had labored over. The room shifted. Slack pings began punctuating the silence as the meeting wrapped up. Emojis popped into my peripheral vision, clapping hands, light bulbs, the celebratory party cone. A digital applause for someone who hadn't actually done the work. Lorna gave a tiny smile, barely a twitch at the corner of her mouth, and said, "Let's give credit where it's due." I caught Brad's eyes for a second. He looked at me and then back at his screen. He smiled, said nothing. I returned to my desk with legs that felt colder than the room. I sat down, opened a folder on my desktop labeled, "If Needed." Buried inside were date-stamped drafts, original frameworks, notes from client calls with my handwriting. I added this morning's version to the archive. I wasn't planning anything, at least not yet, but I needed to remember that I hadn't imagined any of this. The folder name came from something Mom used to say when we were kids. Always keep a copy for yourself, just in case. She said it after the spelling bee fiasco when I was 10, the year I lost to a word I knew by heart, acquiesce, because Lorna had convinced me the night before that it started with an E. When I came off stage, humiliated and blinking back tears, Mom just said, "Grace in losing is still grace." But later that night, she slipped a caramel into my hand while no one was looking. That memory always floats up in moments like this, like it wants to remind me that someone once saw me, even if just quietly. Back in the office, the chrome of my chair reflected the light like a mirror too bright to stare into. The whiteboard still had remnants of yesterday's brainstorm. My handwriting, now half erased. The tail end of a word vanishing into nothing. Someone had rubbed it out without even noticing. Across the room, Lorna chatted with Samantha about the holiday gala. I heard my name mentioned once. Then laughter. I turned to my inbox. One unread message. Subject. Per request, please prepare the gala packet. Urgent. Sender, Lorna. No, please. No acknowledgement. I opened my inbox. One unread message. Per request, please prepare the gala packet. Urgent. From Lorna. No, please. No acknowledgement. Mom's house smelled like cinnamon and floor wax, the kind of scent that tricks you into feeling safe. The front door stuck slightly when I pushed it open, just like it always had. That brief resistance was strangely comforting. Inside, everything looked the same. The woven rug that curled at the corner, the couch covered in plastic like a relic too sacred to use, and the fading photo of Lorna and me on the mantel. She was smiling. I was mid-blink. Mom never bothered to update it. "Sen!" Mom called from the kitchen, her voice wrapped in steam and sugar. "Did you eat?" I didn't answer right away. I was still standing in the entryway, adjusting to the time warp. The air was warm, like it had stored up decades of withheld words and decided to exhale them all at once. In the kitchen, she handed me a mug, chipped at the lip, flower print faded. The tea was lukewarm. "Didn't know if you'd come," she said. "I said I would," I replied, setting the mug down. "You said Sunday." She nodded, eyes drifting toward the back window. The faux harvest leaves still clung to the curtain rod, left over from Thanksgiving, or maybe the year before that. I followed her gaze, but saw nothing but the brittle yard and a rusting bird bath. "I was cleaning out the den," she said. "Thought you might want to go through some of your dad's things." It wasn't framed like an invitation, more like a test. The den smelled of old paper and wax polish. Dust danced in the sunlight, slanting through the blinds. The desk drawer was just as I remembered, sticky at the edges, stubborn like everything else in this house. I pulled it open, and there, beneath a yellowed ledger book, was a note. Folded, plain, my name on it. For Sen, just in case. I froze. Dad's handwriting leaned left, like every letter was dodging something. I unfolded it slowly, almost afraid the paper would crumble. Inside, a bank folder, faded blue. I opened it. A savings bond. My name, signed 2003. Have you ever discovered that the people who raised you also tried to erase you? The kind of silence that isn't innocent, but chosen. If you've ever felt like an afterthought in your own family, leave a comment number 8 below. Now, let's keep going. It felt like holding a whisper. I sat back on the carpet, suddenly 15 again. A dinner flashes in my mind, Lorna talking over me, Mom laughing, and me clearing the plates alone while they discussed her latest debate win. No one had asked about my biology test. I'd gotten an A. Back in the present, I stood up. The carpet left marks on my knees. I took the note into the kitchen. Mom was rinsing dishes. "He meant well," she said before I spoke. "He just didn't say much." There was no point asking how long she'd known. She'd probably found it years ago. Maybe she was waiting to see if I'd ever show up, ever look. Or maybe she wanted me to know now, in a way she could still control. The radio was on. Willie Nelson, soft and nostalgic. I looked up at the wall where an old church photo hung. Lorna and I in matching dresses. Mine wrinkled, hers ironed. The silence stretched between us. Not cold, just tired. I lingered in the kitchen longer than I needed to. Mom wiped the same spot on the counter over and over again, a silent rhythm that filled the space between us. She wasn't one for questions, never had been. but her silences had weight, like sandbags against a storm door. "Did he ever talk to you about it?" I asked finally. She paused, cloth in hand. Number, but I knew he'd done something. That was all she said. That was all I'd get. I stepped into the hallway, drawn by the rhythm of Willie Nelson's voice, and something else, memory maybe, curled at the edges of the wallpaper. There had been a birthday once. Mine. I must have been 11. Lorna got me a book on marine biology. Mom clapped. Dad came in late, held out a small hand-carved wooden seahorse. I remembered thinking it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Lorna said it looked like something from a yard sale. He never defended the gift, just smiled faintly, then left to take a call. I kept the seahorse for years, tucked in the back of a drawer, until it cracked down the middle during a move. I never threw it out. Back in the den, I sat down again, this time letting the weight of the folder rest in my lap. I ran my fingers over the embossed edges, the slightly warped paper. There were coffee stains on the corner, Dad's signature mark. He'd never used coasters, much to Mom's quiet frustration. The bond wasn't much. A few thousand, maybe, if it had matured right. But that wasn't the point. The point was that for once, there was something he hadn't shared with Lorna, something that bore only my name. And that made it feel too big to hold. I glanced toward the framed photo again. Lorna's smile had always been practiced. Mine looked like I'd been caught off guard. I probably had been. The drawer creaked slightly as I pulled it open again. I looked at the note, the signature, the date. 2003. That was the year he stopped coming to my swim meets. Said he was traveling more for work. But I remembered Mom saying once, in a tired voice over a glass of boxed wine, "He doesn't know how to be needed by both of you." Maybe this bond was his version of trying. Quiet, hidden, and late. I folded the note along the old crease, slid it back into the folder. I didn't want to take it. Not because I didn't believe I deserved it, but because I didn't want to owe him the feeling it stirred in me. I tucked the note back in the drawer, not ready to take it. Yet. If erasure had a color, it would be beige. Like the dress Lorna picked for me to wear to the gala. It had arrived in a garment bag 2 days before the event. No note, no call, just the dress. A quiet directive. When I held it up in the mirror, it looked like something a silent extra would wear in a film. Present, but not meant to draw attention. I wore it anyway. Driscoll's ballroom was already humming when I arrived. Warm lights washed over polished marble, reflecting in the tall windows like candlelit echoes. A string quartet played Sinatra, so diluted it barely registered as melody. I walked past clusters of coworkers. Some I recognized. Most I didn't. Lorna always said networking was about being remembered. I'd long since learned that being overlooked was my specialty. At the check-in screen, I typed my name. Nothing. Again. The attendant frowned, then asked, "Could it be under another name?" I gave Lorna's. There it was. 2 tickets, one with a +1. Mine, apparently. I didn't correct them. Inside, Lorna sparkled. Her dress caught the light with every turn, and she greeted people like a queen in exile returning home. The HR reps swarmed her, all teeth and small talk. When the press photos started, I stepped into the sequence only to be waved off. "Later, hun," she said without looking. I stood to the side as the camera flashed around her. My reflection in the window looked washed out. Beige upon beige. I found a seat near the back, half hidden by a tall centerpiece of winter roses and pine. The shrimp cocktail tasted like air. The dessert, something sculpted in chocolate, remained untouched. Lorna's voice rose over the chatter as she began her speech. I'd written parts of it, maybe more than parts. Phrases I'd tested in team drafts, rhythms I recognized in the cadence. No mention of me, of course. Her delivery was perfect. She'd always been able to make borrowed words sound earned. My phone buzzed in my lap. One message. File ready when you're here. I didn't look up. Just pressed send. The attachment blinked into the cloud. My insurance policy, stored in a folder called If Needed. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but knowing it was there gave me a kind of power I'd never had in this family, or this company. I glanced around the room. The chandelier above shimmered like a secret, something beautiful and fragile and far too bright to touch. And suddenly, I was 12 again. Church recital. Lorna forgot the words to Ave Maria halfway through. Her voice cracked, her eyes widened. I stepped up behind her, soft and steady. She caught the line from my lips, finished the verse, and curtsied. The applause was thunderous. No one remembered I'd been there. She never thanked me. We drove home in silence that night. I remember watching Mom's hands on the wheel, her knuckles pale against the dark dashboard. When we reached the driveway, she didn't speak for a full minute. Then, softly, she said, "You were steady." That was all. I didn't know whether to feel proud or dismissed. Back at the gala, my seat cushion was slightly damp. The condensation from my untouched cocktail had soaked through the napkin. I should have moved, but I stayed. It was like I'd been rehearsing invisibility so long, I'd forgotten how to exit the scene. A woman from HR passed by again and glanced my way. She smiled the way people smile at service staff. Polite, but hollow. "Lorna's really outdone herself," she whispered to someone nearby. "She's just so poised." The words settled in me like sediment, layer upon layer of sediment. That's what I was in this world, what was left after someone else shimmered. I picked up my purse, stood, and turned to leave. I didn't get far. A man, someone from logistics maybe, bumped into me with a full glass of red wine. It spilled onto my heel, bright and fast. "Oh," he muttered, then turned and walked away. No apology. The lobby, when I passed through it earlier, smelled of pine-scented cleaner and perfume. An odd combination that reminded me of Christmas Eve services when I was younger. The staff had lined the entrance with white poinsettias and fake snowflakes suspended from fishing lines. Under different circumstances, I might have called it charming. Outside, the chill hit harder than expected. My dress offered little protection. A breeze lifted the hem slightly, and I instinctively smoothed it down. A couple passed me on the sidewalk, arms linked, laughing softly. I looked away. I pulled out my phone. The message to Elijah had no punctuation. Just, "Come." There was something about typing it that made my throat tighten. He wouldn't ask questions. He never did. He just showed up, even when I didn't know what I needed. Tonight, I needed not to disappear. I step outside into the cold air and text Elijah one word. "Come." There's a moment when boiling soup hits your skin and your mind doesn't catch up. Just heat, just silence. I was reheating lentil soup, the kind that came in a microwavable container, more salt than nutrition. The break room smelled like every Monday, burned popcorn, synthetic cheddar dust, and old coffee that had been sitting on the burner since 9 a.m. I stirred mechanically, eyes half on the microwave, half on the blinking light of the fridge filter. Then, her heels. Sharp, deliberate. Lorna swung in like wind through an open door. Her hair is perfect, lips too red for a Monday. She didn't bother with greetings. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "Planting rumors? Undermining me after everything?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" Her eyes flared. "You've been feeding Elijah, twisting things. That file at the gala? Your fingerprints are all over it. She took a step forward, grabbed the soup from the microwave, the container still steaming. Her hand trembled, barely, but enough. Then she threw it. The cup didn't arc gracefully. It jolted midair, clumsy. It hit the tile near my feet, lid popping off. The soup splashed, hot, orange, furious. It caught my wrist, my hip, the hem of my blouse. The pain came second. The stillness came first. I didn't cry out, just stood there, staring at the stains spreading like an ugly flower. Elijah walked in. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He looked at me first, then at the soup, then at her. "Were you just assaulted?" he asked, voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. Lorna scoffed. "Oh, come on! It was an accident." I pulled the USB from my coat pocket, set it gently on the break room counter. "Start here," I said. "Have you ever been pushed aside until the day you dared to draw a line? That moment when you stop asking for space and start claiming it. If you've ever felt the shift from silence to strength, leave a comment number 9 below. Now, let's see what happens next." Behind us, Darla froze with her mug halfway to her lips. Griffin, the tech lead, stopped pretending to get sugar. Evan, quiet Evan, stood by the fridge like a deer in headlights. Elijah picked up the USB. "I'll need access to a secure terminal." Lorna tried again. "She's been unstable for months. You know this, right? She's vindictive." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done." There was a long pause, the kind that vibrated in the walls, in the hum of the fluorescent lights. I could hear the copier 2 rooms over. Click, click, click. Elijah pulled out his phone. "I'm calling James, our counsel." "You can't be serious," Lorna started. "I'm not asking for your input," he said. Then into the phone. "Hey, it started." That was when the room changed. The air, the posture of everyone present, the invisible rules. The break room had always been neutral ground, shared coffee, passive-aggressive notes about fridge theft. Now, it felt like a courtroom. And Lorna was losing. She backed toward the door. "This is insane! You're making a huge mistake." I didn't follow her. I just looked down at the blot on my blouse, bright and rust-colored. The same hue as Dad's old Coast Guard shirt that he wore when fixing the garage door. I remembered because I'd spilled paint on it. He didn't scold me, just said, "Guess it's part of the story now." Elijah moved to stand beside me. Not in front of me, beside. I could feel my pulse in my temple, in the place where the heat had touched skin. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but didn't speak. The words would come later. For now, this was enough. Lorna stood at the threshold, chest rising and falling like she'd just run a race. Her face crumbled into something I almost didn't recognize. Not rage, not triumph. Loss. I took a breath and stepped forward, just enough so she could hear me. "You taught me how to survive. I just chose not to become you." Not every triumph comes with applause. Some arrive as space, finally empty of noise you didn't know you were drowning in. The first morning in the new co-working space, I unlocked the door before the sun fully rose. The air smelled like cedar planks and dustless light. No hum of overhead fluorescence. No Lorna. Just the distant chatter of a coffee machine downstairs and the creak of my shoes on polished concrete. For the first time in years, I didn't brace myself walking into a room. There was a quietness here that didn't ask me to shrink. The walls were bare, waiting. I opened the window a crack to let in the cool air of early December. On my desk sat a mug, cream-colored with a hairline crack along the handle, filled with my own blend of Earl Grey and mint. A small thing, but it was mine. Everything here was. Evan arrived around 10. He knocked once before peeking his head in, holding a manila folder like it was both peace offering and proof of loyalty. "I wasn't sure if you wanted help today," he said, "but I figured it's a new build. I'd like to be part of it, somewhere honest." He wasn't like the others. Evan had watched from the edges for too long, eyes lowered when Lorna performed her daily silences. Maybe he was just tired of standing still. We went over vendor quotes and projected timelines for Clearline's launch. I watched him annotate margins with questions I didn't have to prompt. Outside, a food truck pulled in, and laughter spilled from the patio downstairs. It felt like a city I hadn't lived in before. Or maybe I had, just not freely. By noon, I had an inbox full of well-wishers and unsubtle relief. One message stood out, from HR. "Lorna has opted for indefinite leave. No apology, no inquiry, just absence, formalized." I didn't forward it. I didn't reply. Later that day, I played a voicemail from Mom. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she said, voice low, distant. "Your sister, she's scared. She doesn't know how to lose gracefully." I didn't call back. I didn't erase the message either. In a drawer, I kept Dad's old blueprint. The boat he never built. He called it Second Wind. I'd found it once, buried under decades of tax receipts. That day, I printed it on thick paper and pinned it beside my desk. He hadn't been brave with his words, but he dreamed in lines and measurements. Silent courage. When the Clearline site went live, there was no media fanfare. Just one small paragraph on the homepage. "Clarity begins with courage." That was enough. Celeste, one of my old interns, dropped by near close. She brought tea, loose leaf in a mason jar, and a set of cups Dad had given me when I moved out years ago. "I kept these," she said. "Figured you'd want them back now." We sipped in silence, surrounded by blueprints and beginnings. She looked around the room and smiled. "This feels like breathing." Evan stayed behind after everyone left, tidying up paper scraps and wiring from the desks. I noticed his notebook left on the counter. Doodles of open floor plans and corner offices with captions like, "You shouldn't need armor." I flipped the page. Another sketch. A tree growing through concrete. And beneath it, in small letters, "Start from where it cracked." My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. No words. Just a photo, me and Lorna, ages 7 and 9, standing in front of the old oak at church. Same dresses, same ribbons. But even in that still frame, Lorna's hand is on my shoulder, fingers slightly curled. Mine hangs loose. Mom sends a photo, me and Lorna, ages 7 and 9. Caption, "Before it got hard." No text. Some endings don't close doors. They build new rooms. Celeste's apartment smelled like cinnamon and something earthy. Maybe the tulip bulb she'd planted yesterday. A hopeful nod toward spring. She had this way of creating warmth without speaking much. The faux fireplace video flickered on the TV, throwing soft orange light onto the cream rug. A Texas winter was trying its best, cold enough for socks and soup, but not cruel. I pulled my knees close under the thick knitted throw, breathing in the quiet. After everything, this stillness didn't feel hollow. It felt earned. There was an old cardboard box beside me, one of the last I'd brought over from Mom's place. I'd been putting off opening it for days, afraid of what grief might still be folded between the layers. The tape gave a soft crack. Inside were loose photographs, yellowing papers, and bits of a life lived in half-light. On top, Dad's Coast Guard discharge form, creased and soft like the hand that once held it. His handwriting still leaned left, like always, A quiet retreat, even on paper. Underneath, I found Mom's casserole recipe. Her handwriting was careful, peppered with exclamation points. Add cheese generously! It smelled faintly of the pantry, of paprika, of Thanksgiving evenings, when the air was heavy with heat and the sense that something was about to break. And there it was, Lorna's birthday card from 2001. Cartoon unicorns, too much glitter, a looped L in her signature. I remembered her getting that stationery set from Aunt Delia. I got socks that year. Elijah came through the door just then, holding a paper bag and wearing that half grin that always made me exhale. Chili, he announced, and possibly the driest cornbread known to man. He didn't ask what I was looking at. He just set the food down, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, and walked toward the kitchen. I caught him glancing at the box, but not pressing. The best kind of respect is the one that knows how to wait. While he unpacked the containers, I returned to the couch and opened a small, hand-addressed envelope I'd found wedged between the recipe cards. No return address, just carefully looped letters. Inside, a folded note from the mother of the intern Lorna had pushed out during her worst quarter. Thank you, it said. You saved my daughter's voice. She almost left the field. Now she's designing spaces that breathe. You reminded her she deserved air. I held the letter longer than I meant to. Some affirmations feel like permission to lay something down. That afternoon, I drove alone to the cemetery. The wind tugged at my sleeves, and the road hummed beneath me like an old song I couldn't place. The pecan trees near Dad's grave were mostly bare, their branches like bones against the sky. I parked and walked slowly, boots crunching the gravel path. There wasn't anyone else there. I knelt by his stone, took out the folded blueprint I'd brought, the one titled Second Wind. It had lived in my drawer for years, maybe decades. I pressed it against the grass. You didn't build it, I said quietly, but you dreamed it. That counts for something. The wind shifted, lifting the corner of the page like a nod. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Back at Celeste's, I noticed something framed on the bookshelf, a slip of paper, carefully matted behind glass. I leaned closer. It was Dad's handwriting, unmistakable. Just 3 words. Hold the line. I stood there for a long moment, feeling every inch of that phrase settle into me. He had never said it out loud. Maybe he didn't know how. But now it lives here, and maybe that was enough. Elijah had fallen asleep on the couch, one arm draped over his eyes, the other still loosely holding a spoon. I smiled and tiptoed past him toward the kitchen. The tea I made was strong, almost bitter. I sipped it anyway. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, hovered the mouse over a folder named If Needed. All my documentation, every erasure, every receipt, every silent scream turned into proof. I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. Not out of spite, out of peace. There would be more days like this, quiet ones, not empty, but slow. Healing didn't come with a ribbon. It crept in, unannounced, until one day you looked up and realized you hadn't flinched in weeks. That night, I opened a blank document and typed the title, Architecture, Building What Was Missing. I didn't know what it would become, a workshop, a guide, a way through. But I knew it started now, and it started with me. Behind me, the tulip bulb sat in its pot by the window, dark soil damp with hope. It hadn't bloomed yet, but it would. I started drafting a workshop for survivors of workplace erasure. The title, Architecture, Building What Was Missing. Some endings are quieter than others. No final argument, no apology. just the absence of weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I've come to believe that healing isn't about fixing what broke. It's about learning how to live with the cracks, and sometimes choosing to build something better from them, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Family doesn't always offer justice or resolution, but it can teach you where your boundaries begin, and that, sometimes, is enough. If this story echoed anything in your own life, perhaps take a moment. Remember the silences you survived. And if it moved you, stay for the next story. I'll be here.